All right. So now we're on the other side. And usually the participants kind of go from where their holding area is and come over to our area. So I usually say good morning in the chat, and hopefully everyone can hear us. And it usually takes a few minutes for people to respond to say that they are hearing us. But um, I always say each time we do this that once the internet works and I have the speaker on, then I feel this huge sense of relief,
Absolutely.
which is really nice. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Tanel. Good morning to everybody. I know we're starting to get folks on. So we appreciate that. Please share your good mornings in the chat if you don't mind. Kathleen, while we're waiting to start, I know other people would be so interested in hearing too. How did you get into this industry or this field to begin with? Like what was your motivation?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I got into the field so very long ago. It's kind of a remarkable trip. When I was in graduate school, which was in the late 1960s, if you can believe it, the whole concept of learning disorders, learning disabilities didn't really exist. And it began to exist as I was a graduate student. And of course, we didn't have anything called ADHD. We had hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. And so
Wow.
I had zero interest in working with this population. I thought, I'm not going to spend my career helping parents deal with hyperactive 8-year-old boys that are going to, quote, outgrow it in a few years, because amazingly, that's what we believed at
Mm.
the time. So it certainly was not a focus of my interest um, during the time I was going through graduate school. But the brain in general was a focus of my interest. And I had the wonderful privilege when I was a graduate student. I went to the University of Florida, and the psychology department was very connected to the medical school and the psychiatric residents being trained there. And in fact, I had a part time job working on the adolescent inpatient unit at for psychiatrically hospitalized kiddos, and my job was to type all of the intake notes. So I can't imagine a better place to learn about what goes on with teenagers, and I loved it. But there was a man named Hans Lucas Teuber, never forgot his name, who was invited to the medical school, and he was a professor at MIT. And at the time, he wasn't a huge name because he was just beginning his work, but basically he was the founder of the Department of Psychology at MIT. They hadn't had one before he came there. And
Wow.
he's basically considered the father of the whole field of learning disabilities, learning disorders. So we were starting to really understand the science, the cognitive science, and the neuroscience, which has come later, about brain functioning, which I did find fascinating. And Dr. Teuber stood there. We're all listening, with bated breath. And he starts his talk saying, our brains are as different as our faces. That was his opening comment. Not that there are these defective brains over here and then these wonderful, quote, normal brains over there. No, our brains are as different as our faces. And interestingly, I was reading an article not 3 days ago about new research that has come out, I believe, in Switzerland, that goes even further to say that our brains are so unique that it's possible to sort of almost take a brain image that's as unique as a fingerprint, that's how unique each one of our brains are. And
Wow.
not only that, but what's so fascinating, and I think it's so important for parents to understand, is that our brains are plastic and dynamic, meaning that our brains are constantly forming and reforming by what we spend our time doing.
Mhm.
So I started very long ago not wanting to specialize in this, you know, hyperkinetic reaction of childhood, which seemed, frustrating and very, very narrow. And what happened was there, quite a few years later, after I was already a practicing psychologist, the federal law was passed that required public schools to offer accommodations to children that were diagnosed with what we were calling attention deficit disorder. And then very shortly, we added the hyperactivity to it. And so my phone started ringing off the hook, pediatricians calling, saying parents want the diagnosis, parents want medication because suddenly there's a good reason for it. The schools are going to have to help them, and we don't know how to diagnose it. Do you? And so all of a sudden, I was in a small group practice, and we actually started a little private clinic, which was the very beginning of what has become the Chesapeake Center,
Mhm.
which, as far as I know, is the biggest private ADHD specialty clinic in the US. I mean,
Yes.
we have a staff of almost 40 people now at Chesapeake, but that was the very beginning. And what we were doing was testing to make the diagnosis so kiddos could get on medication. And at that point, it was basically pretty much Ritalin and get the accommodations in school. And
Wow.
so it was kind of a backdoor way in, not I want to devote my life to, this thing called ADHD, but my phone's ringing off the hook and we need to help these parents.
What
But
a
I'll
direction.
I'll tell you something, and that is that ADHD is very, very personal to my life because I grew up with a younger brother who was not only ADHD very clearly, but also dyslexic. And I was his older sister who was a good student and loved school. And there he was, that poor little fellow. We had no idea how to help kids like that. And he hated school because he was bad at it and it was boring and frustrating. And he not only had ADHD with hyperactivity, but he had trouble reading and writing. So, poor guy, what's he going to do? And the more I started working with families, my stepson and my daughter were both diagnosed with ADHD. And then I gradually came to realize over the first few years that I had it myself and
Mm.
that I'm exactly one of those people that would never be diagnosed because I'm smart and did well in school. I learned ways to compensate for it. And so it wasn't as obvious. And that became a real mission for me to tell the world this is not a disorder of males. I have it. My daughter has it. My sister has it. My brother had it. And so it really has become a personal mission. And now I have
Mhm.
two um, granddaughters, one in college, one about to go into high school, that also both have ADHD. So this is very personal for me, although that's ironically not what got me into the field. It sort of
Wow.
happened in a backwards way.
Well, what a great what a great way to introduce everybody to you. We got a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I'm so glad that we did, and I'm so glad that we asked. And I will say officially good morning to everyone. For those of you who are just hearing Dr. Nadeau's introduction, it was really an unbelievable story, and stories that you hear these types of things, but it's just always so fascinating to hear individually how you think you're on one path and then the phone started ringing and it took you on a completely different path. And in your introduction, which I will do in 2 minutes, I will also emphasize the Chesapeake Center because it is really a phenomenal resource for certainly everybody that's here and anybody who is dealing with ADHD or related diagnoses. So I will quickly go through, who we are. I am Debbie Rosen. I'm the founder of a much smaller organization, even though we do have probably 30 some employees, but not to the breadth and depth of all of the services that Chesapeake offers. But we are collaborators with the Chesapeake Center. And my son was actually initially diagnosed with one of your practitioners, who I still, I didn't even know the letters followed each other with ADHD. So I have a very somewhat similar story in terms of how I got involved in this. And so we have a lot of, not only have I personally used your services, and we've sent so many people there, and vice versa, but your lovely, amazing daughter is a very dear friend of mine, and I just have so much respect for everything she's done. And of course, she's the CEO of the Chesapeake Center. So, for what we do one very small part of everything that Chesapeake does, and you also do this, but we, of course, are an executive function and study skills center. And so what does that mean? It means that we, help students with the process of school. So all of the things that you kind of see there on the right, and here are the services that we offer. And we have a number of webinars each month. We actually have a couple of them coming up in April. I will put a small plug in for the very first one here, which is I went to Canyon Ranch, if you've heard of this, but I won't talk too much about it, and saw this presentation, How Understanding Emotions Make Us Better Parents. It was a different title, but I begged this woman, Mary Keeley, to come please and speak, do that presentation. I was so taken by it, and I've heard a lot of presentations, and so we kind of added her into the April rotation, and we will send out an invitation soon. So everyone who's on here obviously will get an invitation to that, but I really implore everybody to find the time to see it. It was really fascinating. It's so unexpected, and rich, as I know today's will be. And so you'll be getting information on all of these. We also do free workshops. We do these in particular for 4th and 5th graders that are around growth mindset. One is getting our minds set for math, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, I guess, March 23rd. So again, it's for 4th and 5th graders. You can use the QR code, but again, you'll get information. I think something just went out this morning. And then the growth mindset for writing coming up in May. And finally, we do workshops on executive function for professionals. I guess it was probably February that was sold out. So March, April, and May, we still have room available if you are a professional and interested. This is a lot for educators as well. So folks who are dealing with students in the classroom and don't exactly know the difference between, what they may see as behaviors versus challenges from executive function. And with that, we've already done such a phenomenal job in terms of hearing your background. The one thing, of course, I'll add is just the richness and the depth of your experience, and how grateful all of us are for the work that you've done through the dozen or so books that you've written, through the founding of the Chesapeake Center, through the initial groundbreaking work on girls with ADHD. I will cry when I tell you how important that is, because of my daughter as well. And you were just really, I don't know that Dr. Celine would mind me sharing. She spoke last month, and when we got off, the first thing she asked is, would you please introduce me to Dr. Nadeau? She's just my hero. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing and have you share your slides, so you can start the actual conversation. And while you're doing that, Dr. Nadeau and I had a very long conversation about what we were going to actually talk about. And I know that it's a very difficult time when kids are moving to that time in their life where we're not sure if they're ready. And so that's what we really wanted to focus on. And you have such incredibly practical experience, so I'm really looking forward to everything you have to share. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And if those of you who are listening can't tell from the conversation that Debbie and I have just had, this is very much a mission-driven enterprise on my part. mean, this has to do with me and my entire family. I have spent more than 40 years working with people of all ages with this thing that we call ADHD. And what I'm going to be talking about this morning, I think, is one of the critical junctures in life with ADHD. And so I want to talk about not only how difficult it is to make this transition, sort of dipping our toe in adulthood, if you will. And sometimes I've jokingly called college a halfway house to adulthood. You know, we still get fed. People are still taking care of us. We're not out there in the quote real world having to support ourselves and make all of life decisions. But it's a tough transition. And I'm going to tell you some stories toward the end of my talk this morning about a number of people that I've worked with over the years that had a very rough time in college, but ended up with very satisfying, productive lives. And I think what I really want to emphasize is that there are so many of us with this condition we call ADHD that I really think of it as a type of brain rather than a type of disorder. And I really hope that you will come away from today's talk feeling the same way. And that's not to mean that I in any way diminish the challenges that can come with having this kind of a brain, but that we're learning more and more about how to create a life and how to build the support so that people with ADHD have really successful, satisfying lives. And I'm here to say that I really attribute a lot of my success to my ADHD. And I think that one of the things, if you listen to other people talk about it, is there's almost a tribe mentality that people with this thing we call ADHD really embrace each other and support each other and understand each other. And I think that's such a crucial part of thriving with ADHD. So, what I'm going to be talking about this morning is something I went through as a young adult with ADHD, and I will share with you that I dropped out of the first college that I went to after a year and a half, and that was I had gone there in an early admissions program, 2 years early, entered college. Isn't she fabulous? Isn't she brilliant? I loved school. And yet I dropped out a year and a half later because, although I didn't know it at the time, I had ADHD and I was sort of overwhelmed by the life management part of it. So I share that with you. If any of you are struggling with young adults, worried about young adults, that um, we're going to talk about ups and downs and challenges, but also leaving you with a very positive message. So let's get started. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because I really think maybe some of the most valuable things we'll engage in is answering questions that some of you may have after I finish my talk. So let's dive in. So let's start with this. The expectation that college should be the next step is actually, in some cases, a setup for failure. And this is a huge issue in the Washington area. I jokingly say that the Washington area is the biggest collection of people that did their homework in high school and did their homework in college. And to have a professional degree, a postgraduate degree, is the most ordinary thing in the world. in the Washington area. It's one of the reasons I love living in the Washington area, but it puts an incredible amount of pressure on kids growing up in this area that you're supposed to go to college and you're supposed to go to a good college and you're supposed to do well in college. And that's a tough set of expectations for 16, 17-year-olds with ADHD. So instead of joining in this pressure that you're supposed to go to college, let's get ready to go to college, worrying about what college you're going to get into, let's focus on what can we do to help our kiddos be set up for success. I've worked with so many worried parents of teenagers, and one of the things I really want to emphasize is that it's not a straight upward road toward greater and greater maturity and greater ability to manage your life. Going from here to there, going from a kid living with their parents, going to high school, and eventually emerging on the other side as an independent adult is almost inevitably going to be a bumpy road. And if you know that going into it, you'll worry less about it. It's not a smooth ride, and it doesn't mean that you're failing. It doesn't mean that your emerging young adult is failing. So we have a bunch of choices after high school. Gap years are becoming more and more popular. It's certainly possible to go to work for a year or two before trying college. And of course, so many kiddos in the Washington area feel that their only choice is going straight to college. And I really, I really want to reassure parents who are worried about this that going to college isn't necessarily the best choice at all. And one of the reasons for that is no matter how smart you are, the maturity factor, our brain development is clearly, research shows 2 or 3 years, sometimes even more, but on average, 2 or 3 years behind kids at the same age that don't have ADHD. And so you may think you're dealing with an 18-year-old, but if you looked at them and thought, no, brain maturation wise, they're really 15 or 16, then what kind of choices would you be selecting for your kiddo? And that's the way to think about it, that a gap year or 2 gap years can really give your child a chance for brain maturation that will make college a much easier transition later. The same thing for going to work. And of course, even if the choice is college, there's such a wide range of choices. So I have worked with families whose child went directly to college and had a crash and burn, as I call it, freshman year, and came right back home, tail between their legs, feeling like a failure, and having to spend a year or two licking their wounds. But what I tell parents is sometimes nobody designed life very well in that when we turn 17 or 18, suddenly we're supposed to be able to navigate romantic relationships. We're supposed to be able to literally navigate by driving a car and knowing how to take care of that car and drive it safely, which is in the Washington area no mean feat at all. We're supposed to be able to manage our finances if we go away to school. We're supposed to be able to manage our time, our bedtime. When do we go to bed? When do we get up? We're supposed to suddenly start doing our own laundry. Uh, it's way too much to manage all at the same time. And I always encourage parents to start that process early. I raised 3 teenagers, and I started having them do their own laundry when they hit 9th grade because I just wanted them to, that's just a perfectly ordinary thing that isn't a shock, on top of all the other things they're learning to manage as they go off to college. Now, I'm not saying they had neatly folded laundry put back in drawers. It took quite a while for them to manage all of the ins and outs. But the more we can slowly, gradually, and thoughtfully teach our kids to manage the things that they need to manage, the easier it'll be. I have a stepdaughter who doesn't have 1 ounce of ADHD. She is a middle-aged woman, a very successful career woman, manager, executive functioning coming out her ears. And yet, she took a group of girlfriends to the beach just after graduating from high school. She borrowed our ancient station wagon, which we didn't mind allowing her to drive to the beach. And 4 days later, she's coming back, and we get a phone call from a payphone. This is before cell phones, saying, "Well, I'm stuck on the highway on Route 50, and I didn't know what that red light was on the dashboard. So I just kept driving." She burned out the engine of our ancient station wagon, which had to be hauled to the junkyard. And she was a super bright, good student, very mature, and able to manage all kinds of things in life. So, just a little anecdote that growing up is hard to do. And weirdly, in the United States, we expect our kiddos to grow up without us. We expect them to go away to college, which is rarely the case in Europe, for example. Many, if not most, college students still live at home with their parents while they're going through their college years. So we're expecting very high levels of independence, which our kiddos with ADHD brains are not necessarily prepared for. So, this is what I've been talking about, helping our kiddos build skills toward healthy independence. Sleep is a huge one. And I think if you were going to design an atmosphere in which you were going to be taken off track because you have ADHD, you would design today's college campus. They're noisy, they're distracting. It's like trying to go to sleep in the middle of a party. I remember I was married in graduate school, and the married student housing at the University of Florida was behind the freshman dorm. And I heard the yelling and screaming and hooting and hollering at 3 o'clock in the morning, the balloon fights, throwing things off balconies. Those kids were having a nonstop party, and how they ever got up, went to class, and learned anything is beyond me. We haven't organized our universities so that they really support focus and learning. So here are all these things: taking care of our clothes, taking care of a car if we have one, setting priorities. College is just filled with excitement and distractions that pull us away from the very reason we're there for, to study and learn and prepare for adulthood. And choosing friends that support good choices and learning to manage money. I'll tell you one little anecdote about choosing friends that support good choices. I worked with a very bright guy who was attending AU, and he was a psychology major, and he was not doing well. And his parents connected him with me, and I worked with him for about a year. And basically, that young man, bright as he was, and I think he had chosen the right major, he was very interested in it, was living in Animal House off campus. He lived with 3 other guys. There was constant noise, music, video games, people over partying, ordering pizza at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I told him, if you want to do well and graduate with good grades, because he wanted to go to graduate school, there's no way you're going to do it if you live with these guys. I mean, they're the kiddos that wear the t-shirts. I'm sure some of you have seen, "My parents think I'm going to college." Um, that's who he was living with. The next year, at my urging, he moved in with two graduate students that were studying science. One of them was doing an internship at the NIH. Those guys studied constantly. They were serious. And his attitude towards school completely turned around because he was surrounded by two very positive role models. So, what do we need to do to succeed if college is the choice? It worries me a lot. I've worked with so many students as they go to college, but for kids that were diagnosed early, in many cases, they feel that the diagnosis has been imposed on them. My parents think I have ADHD, my teachers, my doctor, and I'm sick of this. And I want to prove that I can be normal and make it on my own. And so many of them stop taking their medication just to prove to themselves that they don't need it, or they take it inconsistently, because guess what? It takes executive functioning skills to realize I'm about to run out of my medication and I need to call my mom, who needs to call my prescriber, who needs to. And so you see this roller coaster ride of, even for those that are taking medication, I'm on it, I'm off it. I can't tell you how few students actually take advantage of the supports and accommodations on campus. No matter how carefully you support your child by carefully researching and picking a school that has such accommodations, many of them don't want to go there. It's just one more thing to do. If they don't go regularly, they don't really form a good bond and connection with the person that they're assigned to be their support person. And it makes them feel different, which is the last thing that college students want to feel. They see it as a sign of weakness. Uh, and often, because our ADHD sons and daughters have this relatively immature brain, they may not even have a sense of purpose other than everybody goes to college after high school. They may have no idea of what they want to study, or a complete mismatch between what they're naturally good at and what they've decided to study. So often they're encouraged by their parents to study something that will get them a good job after college, even if it bears no resemblance to what their brain is naturally good at. One of the things that we offer at Chesapeake, for example, is a career assessment that takes ADHD and learning differences into account, because what you're interested in, that's that's necessary but not sufficient. It's really important to be interested in what you're studying, but it also needs to be something that your brain is naturally good at, or you're setting yourself up for failure. A lot of students enroll in too many classes because they think they're supposed to, and then they end up with this very spotty record because they're dropping classes just before the drop and add period ends, because they don't want a failing grade on their record, but they end up with a college transcript with lots of dropped classes, which, believe me, is not an appealing transcript to show to postgraduate programs. They often end up self-medicating a lot. Alcohol, marijuana are typically the two medications of choice, self-medications, and they're just not very well prepared to function in a consistent way, um, away from home, away from all the structure that's provided by parents. So they just did a study recently that I thought was interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. And in this study, they basically interviewed a lot of college students that had an ADHD diagnosis. What's your college experience like? And this is what they told us. I don't have a daily routine. My days are pretty chaotic. And by that, they meant I don't have a go to sleep time, I don't have a get up time. And of course, as is true for all college students, I have a highly variable schedule. I might have classes all day on Monday and one class on Tuesday, which is really hard for ADHD brains. They talked about not feeling very motivated and therefore procrastinating on doing the studying, on writing the papers, on preparing for tests. Um, Not surprisingly, we know this about ADHD brains. They said, I really can only focus on things that are really interesting to me. They felt really discouraged by their academic performance. Uh, and also they reported, and I think this is important, that they were having difficulties with relationships in college. Now, this isn't true for all college students. There are certainly college students with ADHD that have terrific social skills, and they're social, they're talkative, they're funny, they're spontaneous, and they do well. And I've worked with a number of young men with that sort of personality type that joined fraternities and had a ball and had lots of friends. What they didn't have was good study skills as they were going through. Um, and these students reported that they just sort of had this nagging, constant worry, thinking about all the things that they had done wrong and feeling badly about it. So, what's a better path for success? I think it's so important for parents to develop a contract with their high school student to say, if you want to go to college, it's not just can you get accepted, can you get in? You need to demonstrate to me that you're ready to manage yourself so that you can do well in college. The world is filled with students that did well in high school when they had the supervision of their parents, that had a crash and burn year the minute they went to college because they weren't ready. So I'm a real believer in show me you're ready. And one of the best ways to show me you're ready is if you can get yourself to bed at a reasonable hour and get up without me having to wake you up at all, and be ready for school and show that you're organized and able to go through your school day. Because that's what you're going to need to do in a year or two all by yourself when you go to college. I mentioned the career assessment. I think it's so valuable, and it's such a small investment to have a career assessment for your high school son or daughter that really tells them what's a great match for your natural strengths and your natural areas of challenge, but also that are a good match for your personality and your values and your interests. I think of it sort of like a Venn diagram, where in the career assessment, we're looking for the overlap. Where's that sweet spot? I'm good at it. I'm interested in it. Uh, it's a great match for my brain. I've worked with so many college students that almost went through college backwards. Well, I know I'm bad at math, so I'm going to eliminate all these majors. And I know I hate to write, so I'm going to eliminate. And they ended up in a major that had no bearing on what they wanted to do for a living or do with their life when they got out. So we really try to help students have a strength-based, interest-based perspective. Um, I think sometimes it helps for students to have some skin in the game. And by that, I've worked with some parents whose son or daughter had signed up for and dropped so many classes that they were on the 6-year plan, very expensively going through college. And some of those parents finally said, A, you're going to come home and live at home and go to college locally. And thank goodness in the DC area, we have so many choices available. And what we're going to do is we're going to take out a student loan for your tuition every term, and that loan is in your name, and we'll pay it off if you earn decent grades, but it's on you. We're not paying for C's and D's and dropped courses. I think we need to really find ways for our sons and daughters to begin to connect with the reality that they're going to be dealing with for the rest of their life. So having some skin in the game is a really good way to do that. And they might, after going through, oh, now I owe $15,000 and I dropped 3 classes and I didn't get much out of it. Maybe I need a gap year. Maybe I'm not really ready for college. Sort of reality is telling them that rather than their parents telling them that. I've had lots of students be very successful while coming home, attending college from home, and then even if they're a year later living on campus, they're still able to come home on weekends. They still have the support of their parents in a much different way than they would if they're going to school many hours away. And also, there's always the combination of working part-time and going to school part-time. My college-age granddaughter with ADHD is doing that for her freshman year, and it's going beautifully. She is taking 2 college courses. She is living at home, and she's working 3 days a week. And she's doing a very good job of everything. She's not overwhelmed with college. She's learning all the skills of I've got a job, I've got a time to get up, so I need to go to bed. Um, she's learning that she has to pay a lot of money for the car that she scraped in the parking garage a few weeks ago. She's learning the realities of life, but not in a way that's overwhelming her and making her feel anxious and like a failure. So, what are some strategies to succeed in college? Of course, make choices that emphasize your strengths and interests. That's what our career assessments are about. Don't just think about what you're bad at. Shop for professors. This is a great strategy that I learned from a student. He was going to the University of Vermont, and his parents were expecting him to pay for part of his college, not because they needed him to, but because they wanted him to have some skin in the game. And he told me that he shopped for professors. And by that, I mean that he thought ahead, what are the courses I'm going to sign up for next semester? And he would drop in on classes to see which professors were engaging, interesting, clear in their teaching methods. So he was really acting like a consumer. I'm paying a lot of money for these classes. I want to get the very best classes. And what a smart thing. It hadn't occurred to me to do it, but now I always recommend that to students. Be strategic. I've told many, many students there are always going to be 1 or 2 classes in your chosen major that are the really tough ones. And if you're smart, you might think about coming home and taking that class, for example, at the University of Maryland in the summertime by itself, working with a tutor. You might be able to pull off an A or a B because you're not juggling 3 or 4 other classes at the same time. So be strategic and don't be overly ambitious and then end up dropping classes semester after semester. It's very expensive and it's very discouraging.
Dr. Nadeau, before there was a question, and we can ask this later about gap years in terms of ideas. Do you have ideas of different gap years? And you can decide to answer that later if there's a better time in the presentation.
I don't think we're going to have time to talk about that. In fact,
Okay.
I'm going to go very quickly through my remaining slides so that we can have a little time for Q&A at the end.
Got
But
it.
I think all of you are familiar with the standard accommodations, extended time when taking tests, getting a note taker, or even being allowed to record lectures, taking a reduced course load, taking tests in a non-distracting environment, And in some cases, it's not easy to accomplish, but in some cases, you can have course substitutions if you have a documented learning disorder. I have certainly had people that were able to get a foreign language waiver and were able to substitute a cultural class in terms of foreign language. So, what's an ADD-friendly college environment? Sometimes a single room is going to be a good choice. Mentioning my college student granddaughter, her prescriber, her psychiatrist, is going to write a letter recommending that she be granted a single room. She's about to move from living at home for a freshman year to living on campus. And I think that's a great accommodation for her, and I think she'll do much better. Um, as I said before, hang out with the kind of students you want to be like, um, and look for ways that create an environment that you feel good in. I always do that with my office. I always have an office with a nice view and light coming in because I feel better and function better. Uh, and this is just a little nugget that works for all of us, but a few college students understand it. And that is green breaks. When I'm working very hard, I'm in a very intensive work period myself now, I go out. That's what my break is. I go for a walk. It calms my brain down. And there's a lot of research that green breaks reduce ADHD symptoms. So, what about going to work after high school? There's a lot we can learn in going to work. And if we're not good at it in the beginning, the consequences, the lifelong consequences, are a lot less if we have those problems in our first job rather than have those problems during our freshman year. Skills like timeliness, being dependable, getting there, doing what we're supposed to do when we get there, dressing appropriately, getting along with people, and learning how to manage your ADHD problems in a setting that is requiring executive functioning skills. I won't talk any more about this because I've already said enough, but the career that we choose when we have ADHD is really one of the most crucial decisions we'll make in life. So let's talk a minute about crash landings. We used to call these boomerang kids. These are the kids that come home after having failed in college. And I've worked with a number of desperate parents that didn't know how to navigate that. Is this just the same kiddo that I had 2 years ago in high school who wouldn't make his bed and wouldn't get up in the morning? What are the contracts that I should have with this boomerang kid? And I think it's so very, very important to have a contract and expectation. What you're expected to do, what you expect us to do, because it's not the same as 2 years earlier. All of our kids came home after college and lived with us, but we told them, welcome home. We are delighted to see you. It was wonderful to have them back, and you will have free room and board for the first 6 months. And then after that, we are expecting you to have a job. We're expecting you to start paying rent to us. And guess what? They decided if we're going to have to pay rent anyway, we'd have a lot more fun living with friends. And so 6 months later, all of them decided to move out. There are different situations for different kiddos, but we did set clear limits. This isn't like, put your feet up, watch Netflix, and, tell us you're, quote, trying to find a job. So I have some success stories, but I'm also very aware of the time. And I think at this point in time, our time would be better spent answering questions from those of you in the audience. I'm sure you have a lot of them.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Nadeau. Well, thank you for leaving the time. I'm going to start by helping you out with yes, asking some of the questions. There was a number of questions on the career assessment, and one of them was, when would you recommend a college-bound student take the Highlands Battery, which is obviously one of the things I wanted to confirm that, of course, was what you were talking about, before or after college applications are submitted?
Oh, I think earlier is better because it's not just the Highlands Battery. What we do is we combine four things that are very important, and we're unique in doing this. We combine the results of the Highlands Battery. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a very intense, computerized online set of subtests that really measure strengths and weaknesses, measure learning styles. It gives you a wealth of information. But we combine that with the Myers-Briggs type inventory because that gives us a chance to talk with you about what are your core values, what matters to you, how do you like to live in the world. How much are you driven by interpersonal connections versus financial success versus becoming a leader or manager? Just who are you in the world? And we also give the strong interest inventory, which matches, you just fill in your interests and it matches those interests with people that are successful in different careers. And then the fourth thing is, inevitably, the students we're working with have had a neuropsych evaluation or at minimum a psychoeducational evaluation. So we're looking at the academic strengths and weaknesses, the cognitive strengths and weaknesses measured by that neuropsych eval. And again, I mentioned the Venn diagram. We've got four circles, the Highlands, the personality type, the interest inventory, and the neuropsych eval. And what we're looking for is, where's the sweet spot where all of those four assessments agree? This is a good direction for you. It's not going to say you should be a firefighter. What it's going to say is that this is the type of career that's going to be a great match for you. And it's going to look at your interests. It's going to look at, are you a people helper? Or are you a creative type? Or are you really focused on management and leadership skills? What are you just sort of naturally drawn to and good at? And I think it's one of the best investments a student can make. And take it before you're applying for college because it may have a big influence on which colleges you decide to apply to once you have a clear idea of the kind of things that are a natural fit for you.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more because I think that there is so much unspoken anxiety for kids because they are, to your whole point in this presentation, they believe that they should know already what they're doing and they should be on this path to college. And I think there's a question that follows up, and then Brian will ask your question. Um, Erica, you get that test at the Chesapeake Center, and I sent the link a little bit earlier. We can, maybe if Lindsay's on, she can send that again. But that was the organization that Kathleen or Dr. Nadeau has founded. And so there was another follow-up question, Dr. Nadeau, about how to convince somebody to take that. How might you talk to someone about taking that career assessment if they seem to be not open to it?
I wouldn't recommend it. I absolutely wouldn't recommend it. I actually did a career assessment for a young man who was the son of a friend, and she was very worried about him, and he did the Highlands, and I didn't know him well, and he had not had a neuropsych evaluation. There wasn't other information coming into me. And he was so unmotivated, so resentful of being forced to do it, that his Highlands was completely inaccurate. It was a misrepresentation. I mean, he deliberately did badly on things because he was angry at his mom for making him go through this dumb test. So, not going to
Sometimes
get
people aren't ready.
right.
We had a question from Brian who said, our college son is struggling emotionally at school. He has a single dorm room. He's on the swim team, but he's overwhelmed and therefore emotionally exhausted. How do you convince someone of the value of therapy who is resistant to receiving help from others? We get this question all the time about executive function support.
Well, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I don't think it ever works, whether it's therapy, whether it's coaching, whether it's career assessment. All you can do is make those things available. But what you can do as a parent is to say, um, there are supports available, but I don't think it's a good idea for you to stay in college if you're not doing well and if you're not feeling well. So if the supports don't appeal to you, maybe it's time to take a gap year from college, and that's entirely possible to do. You can take a break and regroup and grow up a little bit and go back. In other words, we don't have to
Mm,
allow, we're paying for it. We don't have to allow our immature, frantic, overwhelmed 18, 19, 20-year-old to continue on a path of self-destruction. I mean, there is a time when we just have to take the reins and say, this isn't working. We're not going to let you hurt yourself in this way. And let's regroup and try again when things are feeling better.
yeah. I will also offer that the gap year, my son repeated a grade when he was younger for social emotional, and then he took a gap year. It was the greatest gift I could have ever given him. I am such a huge fan because I want to ask parents, what could be the downside? Right? What is the downside of giving them an extra year? Is it that they get to work a whole nother year longer? What is the downside? And so I really couldn't agree more about the opportunity to not make them continue to suffer if maybe they just take a little bit of a break and come back with a different perspective. So um, I know we have a lot of other questions. Um, so there was a number of questions on the career assessment. So it says, meaning, can you tell if somebody's giving the right answer, meaning students are sometimes conditioned to provide the answers their parents want to hear?
Yes, and I see a question in the chat about the Myers-Briggs, especially. And I'm a psychologist, and so my job is to get a reading on people, not just take at literal face value what they say about themselves. And very often, um, the test results come back, and I say, we have a real mismatch here. If you are this person that you tell me you are on the Myers Briggs, then the interests you tell me you have are a very big mismatch for this person you say you are. And furthermore, a mismatch with how you've done on the Highlands. And so let's talk about that. I mean, I remember talking with a young woman, and in this case, it wasn't that she had misrepresented, it's that her father, for some unknown reason, wanted her to be an engineer. And yet her personality type was very extroverted and focused toward helping people, which is not the personality type of an engineer. And the father was angry at me. How can you say that? How does one little test tell me that my daughter shouldn't be an engineer? Because he just had it in his mind, she's good at math, engineering is a good idea. By God, that's what she'll do. So there's no perfect test, and I think it's really helpful to have the assessment done by a psychotherapist, by a psychologist, because it's our job to get a sense of people outside of just the numbers and the scores that come back on a test.
That's a great answer. So there's a question about loving to hear a success story because her son went to a very rigorous IB high school program and has done fairly well with support from us. I know executive function challenges will be an issue for sure, but he really wants to go to college. He says to go, I'm assuming college. I'm wondering about cases where it's worked out and what the contributing factors were. I know you spoke to a lot to the contributing factors the readiness and other using accommodations and things like that. Do you have a success story that you think you'd like to share as we are looking to maybe close this up that might
Sure.
be helpful for Golnar?
You know what I would say? Your son's in an IB program, very demanding, obviously a good student, obviously wants to go to college and take it seriously. And what I would say to him is, if going back to the slide I talked about being strategic, that rather than trying to prove yourself and extend yourself, that less is more. I always say, no matter how smart you are, no matter how good a student you are, it's better to take less than a full course load when you start. Take 4 classes instead of 5. You can always catch up credits in the summer if you're really wanting to graduate in 4 years and need to do that. Think about what I said about strategies for taking your most difficult classes by themselves when you're at home in the summertime with a tutor. I mean, just be strategic. I think that very bright students often set out wanting to prove themselves. I'm smart. I'm a good student. I don't need any of this, and they're setting themselves up for failure in doing that. Um,
Yeah, and there's also this unbelievable, there's also this opportunity because there's an unbelievable number of resources, whether they'll use them at school or, in through the Chesapeake Center or through Study Pro or through a whole bunch of individuals that can provide um, coaching, executive function coaching, just to kind of start them, right? And to help them feel more confident that maybe they're not missing anything and they can do those types of things remotely or on campus. I know for my son, he used an executive function coach from his school all 4 years, and it was exceptionally helpful because it just gave him a chance once a week to focus on what are my responsibilities. And so I think all of those things, feeling like you have a little bit of a safety net, has to be something that I'm sure you recommend as well.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that a lot of educators and parents don't think about is there has to be a good connection, a good match between the support services being offered and the student. Just as, I mean, you can't just go to any old therapist if you don't feel they understand you, if you think they're rigid or boring or judgmental or whatever you think, you're not going to get anything out of that therapy. And the same thing is true for accommodations. I have referred people for years to one writing tutor in Alexandria. I've referred people to him for 35 years. He is fun. He's enthusiastic. He makes you love to write. And he's worked with PhD scientists that were clients of mine that were struggling to write their academic papers, college freshmen, you name it. But the reason he's so good is he's fun. He makes it fun. He challenges you. He jokes with you. And I think a lot of tutors can be kind of school marmish, and this, especially guys, go, "Oh God, I've got to go talk to this lady, and she's just going to ask me if I did what I was supposed to do last week." And I remember one boy saying, "My mother is hiring a professional nag."
Oh gosh.
So
Yeah.
it's so critical to find somebody that your son or daughter enjoys working with.
Yes,
Uh,
and feels that is invested and not judgment, right? It's not about judgment, it's about invested, and they want to do well and because they feel that they're motivating to them, right?
Absolutely. I see that we're out of time.
Yes.
Um, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I hope that what I've had to say is helpful
Well,
to
we have gotten a
listen.
plethora of comments about how helpful it was, and I just can't thank you enough, Dr. Nadeau. It's such an honor to have you here, and I know for sure that my daughter is in your future. You know that she is coming your way for all of this. So we are so grateful. I'm in text contact with your daughter, so
Okay, thank
I
you.
hope everybody else does too. Thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.